I am Lynne Whitesides, and you are listening to Gospel Tangents.
The best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Hey everybody, I have some really sad news. Lynne Whitesides, the first of the September 6, passed away yesterday, July 7th, 2025, due to pneumonia and complications from leukemia. So I'm really sad about that. It was fun to meet Lynne a couple years ago. She was on my podcast, and so I just thought it would be nice to post the entire interview from 2 years ago where Lynne talks about her experiences, and my heart goes out to the family. It's always tough to lose a loved one, and so anyway, here's our conversation from summer of 2023. Welcome to Gospel Tangents. I'm so excited to have one of the original members of the September 6. Could you go ahead and tell us who you are and where we are?
I am Lynne Whitesides, and I was the first of the September 6.
Okay.
And we are at the University, the Utah Valley University in Provo.
Right.
Are we in Provo?
Actually.
We're in Orem.
We're in Orem.
Yeah, we're in Orem. Yeah.
So. Well, very good. I've been doing this podcast for 8 years now, and this is our first time talking. So
yeah.
You're hard to track down.
I don't know, but I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks. Well, as we look back on this, can you talk about the events? I don't know how far back it goes. Does it go back to the 80s, or was it just really concentrated in the early 90s that led you into trouble with church authorities?
Well, I can go back a little farther, even in my own,
Okay.
with my own, but I don't know that we want to go there. I'll start from when I moved from Chicago to Salt Lake City.
Okay.
And when I did that, my friend Lori Stromberg, and do you know Lori?
A little bit.
Yeah. Lori said, why don't
We're
you...
Facebook friends.
Are you okay? She said, why don't you volunteer for Sunstone? And I had 3 little kids, and my husband was doing his residency, and he had gotten his residency here in Salt Lake. And so I went down and I volunteered to just be one of the people who helps at Sunstone. And at the end of that symposium, so that was 84 or something like that.
Okay.
Then I think Marty Bradley had a talk with Albert Peck and said, we think Lynne should be the new chair of the symposium.
Oh.
So they invited me to be the chair of the symposium for the next year, which I did from, I did it for 4 years. So whatever the 4 years were.
Oh, you were the leader of Sunstone?
No, I was the chair of the symposium.
Okay.
Albert was the editor, and Daniel Rector was the publisher. And then there are like Marty. At the time, her name was Marty Esplin. Her name is Marty Ashby now. She was an editor. There were it was a really cool crew that worked there. Connie Disney.
So this was after Peggy Fletcher Stack.
Yes, and just right after when Albert took over.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was so much fun working with Albert and Daniel. Because I had no idea how to pull a symposium together.
Okay.
But Albert in particular was so gracious and helpful and just kind of showed me the ropes. And by the time I was done 4 years, I could run a symposium. So it was kind of great. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like, because Sunstone, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it used to be a magazine, and it seems like Peggy was trying to get people to write for the magazine, and she started the symposium, and now the symposium is like the whole thing. Like,
yeah,
there's not that many people that read the magazine anymore. Right?
Well, see, I don't even know. I don't follow the magazine anymore at all. I mean, I haven't been to the symposium for years, since 10 years after, and then this year because I had been invited to speak. But but those 4 years were really kind of heady because Peggy that's what she was trying to do. And we were getting a lot of professors from BYU and the University of Utah, but also just all kinds of really interesting people.
Mark Hoffman would have been one of those people.
Yeah, that was the year before I took it over.
Okay.
And
so that was the year, like he had made a big discovery that he announced at Sunstone, wasn't it?
Yeah, I believe it was either 2 or 1 year before, because Steve Christensen was kind of part of Sunstone at the time too,
right.
and I had just kind of met Steve, and then all that stuff happened with Hoffman. So
yeah, well, Steve was killed in '87, yes. I believe, right?
Right. So and by '87, I was doing the symposium.
Okay.
I was chairing the symposium. 87, 88, 89. So 4 years.
Oh, so did you know Steve pretty well?
No, I was just getting to know him a little bit, and then
okay.
that happened. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible. That's such a terrible thing. So you didn't really know Mark Hoffman either?
No, not at all. I mean, I probably went to his talk or something, but I had lived in Salt Lake. Then I moved to Mexico for 2 years because my husband did 2 years of med school in Guadalajara. Then went to Chicago for 2 years. And I'd gone to Sunstone a bunch before then and then didn't during those 4 years. And that's when all that was going on. Okay. And then moved from Chicago to Salt Lake City. And that's when I started working for them. So you see, I was kind of in and out.
Okay, okay. And so you led Sunstone from like 85 to 89 or so?
Yeah, something like that. I wish I knew. I should have checked before I got here. But yeah, I didn't lead Sunstone, but I chaired the symposium.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because you were the Lindsay Hansen Park of the day then, right?
I think so. So, but it was working. Just working so closely with Albert and Dan was super. I mean, they had so much input because Dan Rector.
Oh, Dan Rector.
Dan Rector knew a lot of people because of his dad.
Okay.
Like Hartman.
Rector.
So so he was the publisher at the time.
And he was a former general authority.
Yeah. Well, Hartman was at the time.
Oh, at the time.
Yeah. And then Dan. So Dan knew a lot of. He knew Paul Dunn. He actually knew what was going on with Paul Dunn and confronted Paul Dunn.
Oh.
Which was an interesting story if you want to hear it.
We haven't gone into the Paul Dunn
story. We don't need to, but
we did do tangents here.
Okay, but we can. I mean,
give a little taste of Paul Dunn. I really want to get Lynne Packer because he's written a book on Paul Dunn.
Oh, okay. So what happened? I think Lynne was part of this. I don't know how much I knew Lynne, but I knew of him because we were doing all this stuff. So we had begun to understand, Daniel in particular, that a lot of the stories Paul Dunn was telling were not true.
And Paul Dunn was a former general authority.
Yeah, he was a general authority, and he was sort of the folksy general authority that everybody loved.
Wonderful speaker.
Great stories. Talked about being in a foxhole and holding his best friend while he died.
And he was a minor league baseball player.
So we found out the name of his best friend who died. Daniel found him and said, do you know Paul Dunn? And he said, yes. And he said, were you in a foxhole with him? And he said, that never happened.
Oh.
So Dan...
And you're still alive?
Yeah, you're still alive. And I remember the story, if I can remember correctly, Dan was at the church office building and was in an elevator with Paul Dunn and said to Paul, look, we know this is going on. Paul was doing a lot of business, bad stuff too. But he said, we know this is happening. And Paul Dunn basically said, well, I was just like, wasn't an actual story. It was kind of a metaphor kind of thing. And Dan was like, yeah, I don't think so. So all of that was going on. I mean, it was a kind of interesting time, with Hoffman and then Packer and, Dunn and then, Packer being so angry and mean and going after anybody that didn't agree with him.
Packer.
Yeah, Boyd, yeah.
I think Lynne Packer and Boyd is Lynn's uncle, I believe.
I think so too, yeah. So all that was going on, and I remember Dan trying to give Paul a chance. Paul Dunn, look, why don't you come clean, and then we won't have to do this. But he didn't, and then I can't remember who broke the story. It might have been Sunstone, but it was so long ago.
It was probably Lynne Packer.
Well, but he was talking to us, and there was some kind of connection, and it came out. But Dan tried to give Paul an opportunity.
Yeah, to come clean.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And then they made him emeritus instead of doing anything else. So, that's what we did.
They retired him.
Yeah, retired him. You lie, go away. So, yeah.
Wow, you had quite the experiences there with Sunstone.
Oh, it was really fun and exciting and loved going to work. It was really great. Yeah.
Wow. Was that like a full-time job for you then?
It was full-time really in the summer, but there was a lot of work before, preparation, getting papers, sending out the call, deciding which papers we wanted to do, and then doing all the stuff. Because at that time, we had maybe 1,000 people coming, and we had several hundred concurrent sessions. I mean, it was a really interesting time because everyone wanted to be part of it, right? And then we would always bring in some sort of big name outside of Mormonism religious scholar. Those were fun too. We brought in some really great guys and women, and it was fun to meet them and hang out with them, and just so
Well, they
Yeah.
still do that too today.
Yeah, they do, but at the time, I don't know what they do today, but at the time, that was part of the real fun for me, was meeting some of those people, so.
Can you think of any big names?
Well, Ewart Cousins was one. I don't know if you know who he is. And then, I'm getting old. I can't remember his name. He's a big Jungian guy now. Thomas. I have to think about it.
Okay.
But yeah, so we tried to get Elaine Pagels. I remember that I actually talked to her.
I would love
but
Elaine
she
Pagels.
she had some kind of tragedy in her life, and we couldn't get her. But we've had I'd have to go back and look, but we had pretty wonderful scholars coming and chatting, and then we'd go out to dinner. Anne and Barry Ulanov, who were very big Jungian, they were authors out of the New York Theological Jungian School, like stuff like that, which was right up my alley, stuff I was really interested in.
John Dominic Cresson was there just a couple years ago.
Oh, really?
You know John?
No, I just know the name, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
he's fantastic.
yeah. Well, it was fun because I got to I got to help choose.
Yeah.
This is what I'm interested in. Let's get these people, right? So, yeah. It was great.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize you were the head of Sunstone.
You keep saying that, but just the symposium. I don't want that out there that I was.
The symposium is everything now.
But really, I chaired it. But to be really clear, Albert and Dan we were just always in meetings together and figuring out things together. But I got to bring in a lot of women's study stuff at the time. So when I started chairing it, I was also really understanding feminism and that sort of thing. So I was bringing in people talking about feminism. At least almost every concurrent session, there was a session on women. There was also a session on being gay in Mormonism, and oftentimes sessions about the temple. So that stuff started coming in. It became really fun, but kind of controversial.
Well, and the temple stuff led to a statement against symposia. Was that during your tenure or right after?
Right, it was during so right after I can't remember if it was when we got kicked out or right before, but right around then they put out a statement that people at BYU couldn't speak at the symposium anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, and because of Packer, because Packer gave
Packer.
that talk. Boyd, yeah, he gave that talk that said that there were three evils facing the church: feminists, intellectuals, and homosexuals. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason that was for him, the last straw, because I was on television and they asked me what I thought about that, and I said, well, if Boyd would get a relationship with Jesus Christ, we might get a Christ-like talk out of him. And then the next day, I got a letter for my court. Yeah.
For your court?
Yeah, I was on Chris Van Oker's Sunday morning show or something. So
this is 1993.
Mm-hmm. 1993.
And so was it August, September when you got that letter?
I got the letter in August, because it was during the symposium that I gave that talk.
Okay.
That I gave that interview, and because I was also the president of Mormon Women's Forum at the time, which was the feminist group in town, right? Mm-hmm. So I was doing that. And I was also the chair of the B.H. Roberts Society. So I was kind of doing all three of those at the time. So that's why I was invited to get on that talk show. And
so the key issue was the interview? It wasn't...
Well, there was probably more than that, because I'd begun speaking and saying how I felt. And we'd been in the LA Times, and I did a thing with Margaret Toscano and Marty Ashby, but at the time she was Marty Esplin. I think it was just the three of us. We did a performance piece where I kind of at the end, because Gordon Hinckley had said that we don't pray to a mother in heaven, that he'd written a letter, hey, Virginia, we don't pray to a mother in heaven. And I had said at the end that he needed to understand that that answers to prayers were not given by a man behind a pulpit, and that he wasn't more powerful than the God that made him, and that if we were praying to a female deity, it was because we felt drawn to do that, and that he had to understand that. And that kind of made him a little irritated too. So
I was just talking with Janice Allred, and she had said that Gordon Hinckley had kind of come after her because of she'd given a talk also about the prophet can't lead the church astray, and she disagreed with that idea.
They don't like that.
And so, and Margaret Toscano, it seems like Boyd K. Packer was very involved with her excommunication.
Oh yeah, you know.
And so, do you know who was involved in yours?
Oh, Packer. Here's what happened after. So, do you want to hear what led up to it?
Yeah.
So I was. The whole story is really kind of interesting. So I wasn't feeling really comfortable in my ward at this point. And so I had
just because you were outspoken.
Yeah,
on
that was going on, and I was trying to understand some things, and I was, I'm a convert. I joined the church when I was 18, and so I just didn't know the culture first of all. So when I went to BYU in the 70s, it was like 1970. That was a weird thing anyway, because I realized it was actually 1950 in Provo, and it was a strange experience. But so I didn't know the culture, and I just didn't know the rules in a lot of ways. They just aren't my rules from growing up, and I'm Italian, and that makes a difference.
Okay.
One time Paul Toscano said, yeah, they don't like anyone who's got vowels in their last name. The last letter of their name is a vowel, So anyway, so I had, my home teachers had come to see me, and I told them, I just don't feel like going to church anymore. And so about a week later, I got a call from my bishop that he wanted me to come and see him. And I thought, isn't that great? Look, it's working like my home teachers went, and he now wants me to come. And so I was taking some classes up at the U, and I left the class early, and I went down, and then he and the counselors were there, and they were in their suits, and I thought, wow. Honest to God, I was like, this is so great. So I sit down, and they say, this is what he said. Elder Lauren C. Dunn has asked us to call you in to see if we need to take some ecclesiastical action.
This is at BYU?
No, this was up here in Salt Lake in 1993, right? Like in May of 1993.
Okay.
And I just started laughing, and I was just like, you guys, you got to give me a minute. I thought you called me in here because you cared about me. And then something switched. They all kind of were like, oh. And so we had this lovely conversation. It was really lovely. And they said, I remember the bishop saying, I'm going to tell Elder Dunn that you're fine, you're a lovely person. And so that happened.
Oh.
And so then then in in August when I did that talk, I went and called him Boyd and said what I felt about that, if he would have a relationship with Jesus, we might have a Christ-like talk out of him. I got that letter. And so when my court happened, I was the first, and I was disfellowshipped. And 2 weeks later, the first and second counselors' wives came over to me and said, we need to tell you something. Those guys, the bishop and his counselors, were getting so much pressure from Packer to excommunicate you, and they couldn't because they liked you too much, and that is why you were disfellowshipped. But they actually were told to excommunicate you. So it was an interesting experience for me. And I was like, so Packer and Dunn were sort of they were doing stuff together, and they just were after anyone that they didn't feel like, I don't know, understood obedience or authority or something. Yeah. Okay.
And so Lauren Dunn and Boyd Packer were deeply involved. And then you were the first. So did that affect your church attendance?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes.
Why would you well, because the interesting thing is I've talked to Janice Allred and I know Lavina Anderson for 30 years have continued to go to church every week. Not so with Margaret and Paul.
No.
And I don't think you go to church.
No.
So tell us more about that.
I'll tell you a little bit about that. So I was just disfellowshipped, right?
Yeah.
And I got a letter from them from the stake president or the bishop or something saying, these were the things that I had to do to get back in the church. I couldn't speak in church. I couldn't teach. I could wear my garments. I could pay tithing, but I had to be really quiet. And I couldn't speak ill of the Lord's anointed, that kind of thing, right?
Okay.
But they had followed the handbook, which is really interesting because the handbook said at the time that if you're going to do this, if you're going to take a church action, you have to meet with someone a few times before. So I wrote back and said, you guys didn't follow the handbook, first of all. And I get a letter back and saying, well, actually, the bishop did. He met with you 2 times, one in May, and the other was at my church court. So I thought that was really interesting. So they wrote me this letter, and I wrote them back and said, just so you know, I have absolutely no intention of following your admonitions. I'm not going to stop speaking out. I'm not going to, I'm not going to do that.
So they didn't want you to not just speak at church, but to speak at Sunstone or anything like that.
That would have been the thing. And I was like, nah, that's not my way. So I just kind of started doing something else, which is what I talked about in that talk that I gave. I don't know, but that's what I said. They told me to go find something else to do, and I did.
So you continued to speak out, because I know Janice, they put her on probation, and she said it was, even though it was probation, it was the same as disfellowshipment.
Oh, yeah.
And then they went after her about a year later, but they've never gone after you.
No.
Why do you think that is?
Well, partly because when I left, I was like, you guys go do your thing. That's fine. I really went down a different path. Okay. I wrote them a letter. I wrote him a letter 2 years after I sent it to whoever was the president of the church at the time. And it was a letter of apology, actually, just saying, I just wanted to apologize to you because I had read a book and it had said, when there's been a lot of energy around, you might want to clean it up. So and this had seemed like a bigger thing than I thought it was going to be when September 6th got really big in a way that I did not expect. So I wrote him a letter and I just said, I am so sorry because I was so angry you couldn't have heard what I was saying. So please forgive me for that. And also, please forgive me because I was asking you to give me something that I already had, which is power as a woman. So please forgive me. So I sent that letter, and then they sent a letter back saying, come back to the church. And I just thought, yeah, right. And then I thought about it for a while, and I thought, maybe I would want to go, get back into the church and then leave quietly because I was kind of done, but there was this like energetic thing out there, right? And so I went to my bishop and I told him what I was doing and the work I was doing and how I was being, my life. And he actually said, I think the church could use someone like you, but I have to talk to the general authorities. I'll get back with you. I would love for you to come back. And then I never heard from him again. So that wasn't ever going to happen. And that was it for me right there.
Well, because I'm interested to hear more of your background. I think a convert to the church looks at the church a lot different than a lifelong member. Yeah. And it's interesting because Margaret and Janice are lifelong members of the church. Paul, on the other hand, is still a believer.
I know.
And a convert. So you said you have Italian ancestry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's why you get along so well with Paul?
Well, I think maybe, but I just, I adore all of the Margaret, Paul, Janice. But Paul he's got that Italian humor, and it's great. It's really great.
I love Paul too.
Yeah.
So let's go back and talk about your growing up. So you grew up, is it Italian Catholic or?
No, actually my grandmother was from Italy, my grandfather was from Germany, and my mom grew up with basically immigrants, right? Even though my grandmother, I think, was either her mother was pregnant or she was born here, but she spoke only Italian until she was in 8th grade. So I grew up with those people. They were my grandparents. I hung out with them. So my grandmother made really just one concession to my grandfather. She became a Lutheran and let go of Catholicism. Okay. So I was raised Lutheran, actually.
Okay.
And then it's kind of a long story, but my parents moved a lot when I was a kid. I moved in 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade.
Wow.
And at some point, I kind of didn't want to do that anymore. And I started investigating the Mormon Church, and I thought there's something about it that felt stable to me, I think, at 17. And they were totally against me becoming Mormon completely because they just thought it was the weirdest church. And so I started investigating, and I got to also say the missionaries were very cute, and I was 17. So I was in Florida, and then they moved back up to Pennsylvania. I went from Pennsylvania to Florida a bunch of times. So they moved back to Pennsylvania, and that's where I became a Mormon. I was baptized in New Jersey. And then my parents went to my baptism, and 2 months later, they became Mormon.
Oh, wow.
And then all of my Italian family became Mormon. So there was
way.
Yeah, there's I don't know, 30 of them, something like my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my brother.
Is that because of you?
My parents were going around doing it all. I was at BYU by this point.
Okay.
So so everybody just kind of became Mormon. So
Wow.
it was like maybe 20, something like that, became Mormon, and that changed everything too. Because by this time I was at BYU. And BYU I was becoming a little clearer because, the church in Pennsylvania is very different than the church in Provo, Utah.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh man, now all these people are joining. What am I going to do? Like, this is not the way they said. I joined, they didn't talk about racism. They didn't talk about misogyny. They didn't talk about much, really. They just come in. It's this lovely family thing. So, and when you're 17, you're not investigating too much because the missionaries are cute. So, and that's sort of how I got into the church, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then I went to BYU.
And so you went to BYU. You were kind of a fish out of water at BYU?
Totally fish out of water.
Okay.
At my second year at BYU, I got called in and they said, we think another university might be better for you. I think it may have been because I was hitchhiking to church and I was wearing, it wasn't a match. It just wasn't a match. And I realized it wasn't. So that's kind of what happened.
Hitchhiking, don't you just go to your classes to go to church?
No, actually, because the awards were all over the place back in 70. I mean, they were all over Provo, right? But anyway, the whole thing is they said, we think another university would be better for you.
And you should have come down the road
I know.
Utah Tech at the time.
Yeah,
right?
I should have, right? I don't even know if it was there, or gone up to the U of U. But that started. Was my entrance into being a Mormon in the Wasatch Front.
But did you graduate from BYU?
You know what? I never did graduate. I just, I didn't. I started working. Part of it is I grew up pretty poor and there was not a lot of money. So I started working. And when I started working, I had to kind of work and I just didn't go to school. I was paying for my life and then got married and when I was 26, because I continued to work. And then I actually put him through med school and and then I went back to school right after I stopped working for Sunstone, and I was in school for a couple of years, loved it, doing really well, but then I got kicked out of the church. And then I just started doing getting kicked out of the church created a whole talks, there's a whole bunch of stuff that went along with being kicked out of the church as a part of the September 6th. I was doing newspaper stuff and talks and all of that. And then and then my marriage fell apart. And then I just didn't go back to school. And then I opened up a practice. I'm a life coach. I have read a lot of stuff around the psyche and Jung and Freud. From the time I was 17, I'd spent a lot of time really investigating the way the mind works. And then in 1990, it was what year? So 1993, when I got kicked out, I found a fantastic therapist who saw something in me, and I started attending a group that teaches people how to do a particular kind of counseling. So in the group, there are therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. We've been in that group for 23 years every Thursday night, and he helped me open a practice, and now I'm a life coach.
Okay. For lack of a better word, did you lose your testimony in 1993 when they kicked you out, or? No,
by 1993, I think I was a little more aware of things. That the church actually believed that God lived on a planet next to Kolob and had body parts and passions in a way that I hadn't understood before. But mostly the misogyny and the homophobia and the racism, to me, that was I couldn't understand why everybody wasn't up in arms with Packer giving that talk, for instance. He was saying we are misogynist. He was saying we are homophobic. He was saying we are anti-intellectual.
In 1993, that would have been pretty common for most of the United States to be homophobic, though, wouldn't it?
But don't say that you're a church that, to me, don't say that this is a church that is about love, because that's not about love. I don't give a crap what everybody was saying at the time.
Because I'm trying to remember the political situation. It seems like that was when they passed the Defensive Marriage Act in the Congress.
That was going on, but also the ERA didn't pass.
Well, that was back in the 70s.
But that was also the misogyny part.
Okay.
Which, by the way, the church did everything it could to not pass that ERA.
Right.
And then the marriage.
So there's a lot, because it seems like we're condensing a lot of stuff. So you got the ERA.
But you're asking me what helped me.
In
Yeah.
76, roughly 78.
78. 78.
So 78, does the church put you a big push to shut
To keep
down
women
the
in their
ERA
place.
amendment? Keep women in their place, as you say. And so, I mean, what about 1978? It sounds like you joined the church probably in 1970 or so?
1970.
Oh, in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you probably recognize the racism between 70 and 78.
Yeah, but not because. Well, here's what's interesting. I left and went to BYU. When at BYU, there was no color.
Right.
It was like, so it didn't really hit me.
Right.
Until a little while later, when I started really like reading stuff and understanding. But to say, let me just say this, let me think this so that I can be clear. To say, wasn't that the way the world was anyway? To me, is a church part of, is it really the part of the world? It's the old, is it a hospital or is it a social club? And the fact that a church that touts itself as Jesus is the head of the church and it's love and that, and then to have one of the authorities actually blatantly say that, and not just that, but when I was reading like the John Birchers, all of that stuff too, all of a sudden it was like, this is not the church I thought it was. This church is not this loving, kind, wonderful church. It's as big of a mess as the rest of the world. And I know that's a little naive to think that it wouldn't be, but it woke me up. And I was just like, I'm going to go find something else because I don't want to be part of that.
So can you talk about your feelings of June 1978 when the revelation came to allow blacks to have the priesthood? Was that a good day? Was that a bad day?
Well, it was a great day. I mean, don't get me wrong. But what I found out from Mike Quinn was that it was kind of at the same time when they were doing temples in Brazil and no one knew who was black or white. Uh-huh. And so they didn't know what to do. And so this revelation came. And so do I believe it was a revelation? Probably not. I think it was convenient. And they had to do that. The church is a growing church. It's a proselyting church. So it was too convenient.
When you say too convenient, were those your thoughts in 78 or did that come later?
Well, in 78, I wondered. What was, that's an interesting thing that now this is coming out, Mm-hmm.
The reason why I ask you, Matt Harris is a professor at Colorado State in Pueblo, Colorado.
Yeah.
And he's got a new book coming out that I cannot wait. One of theses that's going to come out is there were some apostles that were hardliners that believed in the race ban, and so President Kimball purposely announced a temple in 74, I think it was, to get apostles to say, there's a big race problem in Brazil. What are we going to do? And so Matt's...
That's one way. I mean, it's possible. It's possible. Of course, he wrote that lovely book, The Miracle of Forgiveness, Kimball. So, I mean, I don't have a lot of faith in them. I guess that's the bottom line, Well, the fact that that was even a question, that there were hardliners about race in this church. It just doesn't work in the way I see the world.
Okay,
right?
okay.
It just doesn't work. Like, why wouldn't whoever was the president of the church or the prophet of the church say, this is ridiculous. We're not going to do this. This is not okay.
Okay.
And I mean, it's still a problem, but
So because we've also got the Equal Rights Amendment. President Kimball was against that, definitely. Did you know Sonia Johnson, or do you?
No, but I was influenced by Sonia Johnson.
I
mean, I gave a talk at Sunstone saying, we're standing on her shoulders as feminists,
Okay.
And she was standing on other feminists. We all stand on each other's shoulders, but she was a real wake up for a lot of us. Well, that was a wake up. Do you want to know what the actually big wake up was? Although Sonia was part of it, but it was who was I think it wasn't Kimball. It was in the 80s. Whoever was the president of the church, might have been Benson, gave a talk, and he quoted Kimball, I think, saying, women, come home from the typewriter, come home from the office, come home and make beds and clean house for your family, because that's what you're here to do. And for a ton of us, that's how Mormon Women's Forum got formed out of that talk.
Oh.
Because everyone watched it and were like, wow, like that's actually the way you see women. That's what this church sees for women. But it was also, like, don't come home from the attorney's office or anything, but come home from the typewriter, come home from the, as if women were here just to serve. And I think it's a culmination of things.
Okay.
Don't you think? Like it builds on things.
Because what I'm hearing is so late 70s, early 80s, the priesthood ban was removed, which, while good, you were like, why did it exist in the first place?
Yeah.
ERA's going, and you're like, women's rights, I believe in that. And then it sounds like you were ahead of the nation, I'll say, as far as gay rights, because, Defensive Marriage Act was the early 90s. Bill Clinton, I remember, signed that into law. And so we've got the kind of this bubbling up of, Elder Packer would say, the three threats to the church: gays, intellectuals, and feminists.
Feminists and intellectuals and homosexuals,
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing, right, to say.
And so those were kind of causing you a lot of personal anguish, I guess, with the church?
Well, part with the church, you know what, also, women weren't giving prayers in sacrament until 78. I mean, they had taken a lot. Oh, there was one other thing that happened too. Which I think is okay to talk about now. So at the time, there was, I'm trying to remember, who was the Relief Society president in the church? Chieko was one of the counselors, and there was Elaine Clyde, who was a counselor, and
Sherry Dew?
No, Jack.
Oh, Elaine Jack.
Elaine Jack. So we had a Mormon Women's Forum, a meeting at my house, and Elaine Clyde came to that meeting and said this to us. And this is when everybody was kind of waking up. She said they'd been in the Relief Society presidency for like 3 or 4 years or something. And Mrs. America, who was a Mormon, had just met with whoever the prophet was, which was...
Miss America?
Yeah, Mrs. America had
Mrs.
met with, was it Hinckley? Maybe Hinckley or Benson, one
in
of them.
the
Hinckley.
80s, it would have been either Kimball or Benson.
No,
probably.
Kimball was gone.
So Benson?
Benson, it was the 90s.
Oh.
It was the 90s.
That would have been after Benson was Hunter.
Yeah, but he didn't last long. It was Hinckley, I think.
Hinckley, okay.
But I'm not sure. But whoever it was, she said Mrs. America had just met with the prophet. She said, how often do you think the Relief Society president has met with this prophet? We've been in there for 5 years or something. We said once a year. She said 0.
Really?
She said, we don't get to do that. We don't get to meet with him. In fact, they had been set aside. They'd, the things when they set people aside. The first. I
you
guess,
mean set apart?
Yeah, set apart. Set aside, whatever. Yeah. But I'm telling the story, it was so long ago, I don't think it'll matter. But because those guys aren't even around anymore. But they had been set apart as being in charge of all the women. And then whoever did that went out, and another general authority came in and said that was the wrong setting apart. And he set them apart to be only over them, so that in the past, if there was a problem in Ohio, the women could decide they could go do that. But now, if there was a woman in Ohio who are having a problem, they had to go to the general authority and go through them in order to go out there. So they had lost a lot of their power.
The Relief Society.
The Relief Society, and which was also really interesting for us. And I know that what they were hoping, because they were really wonderful women, Aline and Chieko were wonderful women. I mean, Chieko just said, "Hey, these people at Sunstone are just like, kids in the programs for smart kids. Why don't you just leave them alone?" But I think they were hoping that we would push the envelope out a little bit for them, so they had some movement. In fact, the day of my court, I got a call from Elaine Clyde saying, "Please don't get excommunicated. We need you guys to do this thing. We want you to move out the envelope so we have more room to move." But
this is Elaine Clyde from the releases, the
Yes.
General Relief Society presidency.
Yes. I also got a call from Connie Chung's people asking me if I would take in a hidden camera, which I said no. But because remember, Connie Chung had a news report thing at that time.
Yeah.
She had called me the same day. But
Oh, wow. She was CBS News?
yeah, she was CBS News. It was interesting, but I said no. But it was interesting because I could tell how much they loved the women of the church, these women, and they had every power was getting taken away from them. And so that was coming into us too. We understood that Mormon Women's Forum was becoming more and more aware of the limits of what was happening and taking away instead of giving women more and more, room to actually be who they are, to do that. Then that kind of pushed us on as well.
Okay. So I think I get a better sense of the things that were bothering you from probably the late 70s. Because it sounds so. When you first baptized, you came in, you didn't know anything.
No.
And then, can you think about when did you first notice that racism or sexism was a problem? Was it 78 when the church is announced the rescission of the ban and the ERA? They're against the ERA?
Well, let me also say this. When I became a Mormon, I was 17 when I was investigating, 18 when I joined.
Okay.
I looked very young. And so I went for my interviews, and no one asked me any sexual question at all. None.
Well, those aren't typical baptism questions.
Yeah, they are. Have you had sex?
Oh, well, do you obey the law of chastity, I guess.
Not a word.
Really?
Not a word. So when I went in for my patriarchal blessing, my bishop asked me those questions. And I looked at him and I said, I think you're a lecherous old man. This is none of your business. Oh. And he did not know. He said, no one's asked you these questions? And I said, no. So I came in not knowing a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
So that, it was really like shock after shock. It was, I was at, like, really? You think that's your business? That is really weird, So I was reeling from that as well. Just kind of like, okay, this is really different than I thought. The race thing, I'd always been aware of race issues, but because I was in Provo and there were no people of color at all,
they
really.
Didn't even have any on the football team back then.
I don't think so, right? So nobody was. So it didn't sink into my consciousness until maybe a couple years before understanding. Wait a minute, there's a ban. You can't even have a drop of blood and be Mormon. Drop of blood that they consider black and
Well, we would baptize them. We just wouldn't give them the priesthood.
But you couldn't go to the temple.
Right.
Yeah. You couldn't do anything. You could, it was ridiculous. It was just ridiculous. And so that stuff was really bubbling up to me as well. I'd spent my childhood reading about everything that I could possibly read, beginning with the Holocaust and then racism and then the Native Americans and understanding the problems. And for some reason, I don't know why, but because of the way the church presented itself, I thought it would be different. Mm-hmm. So it shocked me just a little bit that it wasn't. And that's kind of how it started.
Okay. So you're wrestling in the 80s with feminism, racism, even gay rights?
Even gay rights. Because I had a lot of gay friends by then.
Okay.
It's BYU. I have a lot of gay friends. Huh. Even back then, right? So,
okay.
I had gay friends. I had gay friends who killed themselves, actually, because of the church and the standing. So all that stuff was a pretty kind of tumultuous time with racism and misogyny and homophobia. All of that was part of what we were doing at Sunstone, was trying to raise the consciousness of how do we do this. And at that point, I really was hopeful that the church would kind of want to shift the way it was responding to people. And so when we were doing it and we were having all these sessions, I kind of thought, well, this is great. This is kind of working, right? This is like people are coming, we're talking about it, all of that, and then they went after anybody who was a professor at BYU, which was, trying to shut down Sunstone.
Yeah, which they never did.
Which they never did, but they tried, but it's this. So
they told BYU professors you can't go to Sunstone anymore.
Well, who got also kicked out? Cecilia Do you remember Cecilia
Farr?
Farr and David Knowlton? They right after us, they were also kicked out of BYU. Like there's a lot of stuff. It was almost like it was a purge.
Mm-hmm.
It was a purge going after anyone who wasn't really towing the line.
Okay.
And that was also like I was shocked. First of all, we were stay-at-home moms, a lot of us. So I couldn't figure out what they were so like all worked up about. Like we were just doing like stuff, right? I was raising kids and putting people through, through his residency and all that kind of stuff. And what was the big deal? But apparently it was a big deal.
Huh.
Yeah.
And so basically when your church court happened, did you attend?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you attended, met in the bishop's office. He said...
Well, because I was the first, I didn't know nobody knew what was happening with I was the first.
Because you were the first one.
Yes.
And so then the dominoes started falling after you.
They started getting, here's what's really funny. So, I go to church, I don't know what's going to happen. There are like a couple hundred people singing hymns outside with signs that say Lynne is not a heretic. First of all, that was an interesting moment. And then two of my witnesses, Margaret and Lavina were witnesses.
Margaret
Toscano and Lavina were my witnesses. These people who I adore beyond belief, right? But then they're like in their shoes. So here's the people who are standing up for me. And I was just, when it started happening, it was just amusing. Like, well, there you go. There you go. Yeah. There you go. That's not going to hold any water. But I was so happy that they did it. I had like 5 witnesses. So my father at one point looked at the bishop and said, if you excommunicate my daughter, because he was a very big Mormon believer by that time. But anyway, so it was, when I look back and see that, it's pretty funny.
Okay. So you had the church court. The bishop didn't have the heart to excommunicate you. He said, I'm going to go the soft route. I'm going to disfellowship you.
Me. Yeah.
But at that point, you were like, you know what? If you don't like me, I don't like you. I'm done with this.
Well, other things happened. Things began happening. Part of it was I found this amazing therapist, and I started really working with that. And then my marriage fell apart. And
Is that because of your excommunication? Or you weren't excommunicated, but because of the punishment? Church punishment?
I think it was more because we got married after knowing each other for 4 months, and had 3 kids really fast, and went to med school, and all of that was really. When you look at that, we were in our 20s, we're stupid, just put so much on our plate. That's part of it. He was an introvert, and that was a pretty extroverted experience. And so I think that was difficult for him because the phone was ringing constantly, and I was running the symposium. Like there were always people at our house. So that there was partly that. You can't blame it. Would never blame it just on that. It was the perfect storm of this is what's going to happen. So when that fell apart, and then I was supposed to have alimony till I was 65, but he got Parkinson's a few years after we got a divorce, and so I ended up not having alimony, and I had to figure out a way to financially take care of myself. And I have a natural gift of working with people, and so I started to practice, and so that's kind of what happened.
Well, and that's what I want to get into a little bit, because it sounds very interesting to me. So a few years later, it sounds like you sent a letter where you were forgiving, or you were kind of asking for forgiveness because of your own anger, but you had no intention really of...
Oh, I wasn't coming back. I never said I was coming back. That wasn't the point of that letter.
Okay.
The point of that letter was, I see that I was asking you to hear me, and you couldn't, because it's hard to hear someone who's really pissed about the way things are.
Okay.
Right? And not that it's a problem to be pissed, but I was pretty pissed. I was saying things like, I could do sound bites, and that was part of the problem. Like I was doing talk shows and that kind of stuff. But the other thing is, I really wanted to say, you can't give me what I already have, and that is my own authority, my own power. As a human being, as a woman, and I was somehow asking you for that. So I began to realize that because I wanted their approval, I was just dancing around the patriarchy instead of like going to do something that I really wanted to do. And so when I realized that, sent them that letter, and then I moved into the direction. I was already in the direction of going in that direction where I am now.
Okay.
Because of things that had shown up in my life and the work that I do that has a lot to do with going to Peru and, some of those stuff that I talked about in my talk at Sunstone. But I never even had a moment of thinking of coming back when that happened.
Okay, so was this kind of, for lack of a better word, a way to get forgiveness with the church?
I just wanted...
Where you were forgiving the church?
Yeah.
So this was your own personal forgiveness?
Absolutely. The only reason to do forgiveness is for yourself, really, right? To let yourself off the hook. And I really wanted to let all that go. Like I have come to this conclusion: the church is doing exactly what it needs to do, well, whatever that is. For me, it was the perfect amount of patriarchal authority that I needed to find myself and to go, okay, I don't believe that. That is not good for the world. Patriarchy, in my opinion, is what is crushing the world at this point. And so I don't want that. I want something else. And so that sent me on my way. And without the church, I don't think I would have become who I am, really.
So do you regret being baptized, or was that
Nope.
just part of your journey?
Nope. I actually think every single step was exactly what I needed.
Okay. And so as you're looking at this, so you basically kind of forgave the church and then said, I'm moving in this other direction. Can you talk about your spirituality now? Because it sounds like you just got a different kind of spirituality.
Yeah. Let me also say, as much as I still work on the church. Sometimes I hear stories and I'm just like, ugh. It's just like
Get out of there.
Because the people will come and talk to me because of my
Background.
My background. Being part of the September 6th has got a shadow and a light, so you never know. My own spirituality kind of comes out of I working with the medicines I work with. So I go to Peru every year, and I work with ayahuasca down there, which, if you are aware of the psychedelics that are coming into the country right now, there's a book called How to Change Your Mind. Have you read that, or do you know about it? So anyway, it's been a really interesting thing, although I don't like the way the culture is taking in psychedelics right now. But 30 years ago, I was introduced to them right after I got kicked out of the church. And I started doing ceremonies with people and feeling more connected to the earth and to myself and understanding what it means to be human in a different way than like through Mormonism or Christianity, really, just a whole different way of feeling connected to what I call the divine. And I am nuts about the Creator and what that energy is that created the universe and all it contains. And so I've had a lot of experiences working out, like especially in Peru, working with medicine people and medicine work to understand what it means, to what I want, what my connection is, and how my belief, not even belief, my feelings of being completely connected to a loving God that is so nuts about all of us that it just keeps loving and loving and loving. And it doesn't matter if you're Mormon or not Mormon, but your path is going to take you, life will take you somewhere. And it's the most interesting, amazing ride that I could have ever imagined. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Could you characterize it as kind of New Age religion?
No, I work with people who have been working, their lineage is thousands of years old.
Is it more like Native American religion?
South American, more South American.
South American?
South American. There's more than just South America, but I can talk about that because it's out of the country. I work with a woman down there that is phenomenal, and she does ceremonies. And so I take groups twice a year to her place. And we stay for 2 weeks. And what happens when you're there is you have this connection with you stuff about yourself that you need to kind of connect to. But also you can see this Garden of Eden that she's created out of a deforested place through just the information that gets downloaded when you do this sort of stuff, and the connection she has to the Creator, and that we all have, really. I don't know how else to to say this, but it is this beautiful experience of knowing that you're loved and that everyone is loved, and that everyone's doing the best they know how, and being human is very difficult. It's very difficult.
Okay.
And we have a lot of stuff passed down to us that, I talked about this in that talk, but we have a lot of limiting beliefs that have been passed down from generation to generation: racism, homophobia, misogyny, all those things have been passed down. And so it's not like you can get angry at the people who passed down. I'm really not, but you understand that has been, all of those are out of fear. And that fear has kept people from really connecting. And that the work that I do with medicine work connects you back into the real person, the real essence of who we really are. And that has been priceless to me.
Now, you said medicine work, and that sounds like, we always hear about the medicine man, like kind of a Native American.
Yeah.
Are you kind of a shaman?
Oh, no.
No?
No. But I work with this woman down in Peru. This woman in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
That is, she would never call herself a shaman either. She's an ayahuasquera, but she holds this place for people to come and heal, and it's the most healing. Not everybody should do it, by the way. This is not like, everyone should go out and do any of ayahuasca or peyote or any of those things. But for people that it works for, it is a beautiful experience and helps them to heal from the generations that they come from. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, it just sounds very Native American.
I know it does. I'm not Native American, and I'm not South American, and I've worked with the Huichols out of Mexico, and I've worked with some of the Quechua tribes, a guy out of Machu Picchu, and this woman who has Quechua, but it's not Native. It's just I don't even know how to explain it. Native American is one way, but it's more than that. It's the way of connecting and caring for the earth and loving the earth. It's very feminine. Let me just put it that way. It's a very feminine process as opposed to the patriarchal process, which is, and not that, I don't think it should all be feminine or all masculine, by the way. I think there needs to be this marriage of both so that there's a balance between them. But the work with medicine work is often a very feminine connecting to Pachamama, to the earth, and understanding that. And in fact, it's really interesting. There's a new documentary called Living to 100 on Netflix, The Secrets of the Blue Zones, which basically they found these places in the world where people live to 100, and they've done this documentary on what makes these people, where lots and lots of people live that long and they thrive. They're not just surviving. And a lot of it is they're connected to the land, they eat the right kinds of food, they have community, they have dance, they have song, all that stuff that we don't have because we're so separated. We're so, COVID really did a thing for us where we are just so isolated. And the isolation is a damaging thing for people because we need community. And one of the things that has happened for me is finding community and being able to hold space for more and more community. And so I work with communities, really.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about your family? Because you said that after you joined the church, your parents did, and then your extended family did. How did they react to your disfellowship?
Not so good. Actually, it was really difficult for me because my parents did not have my back. They said that, I probably never believed the church in the first place, and that they sided with the church, which was very difficult for me. And then my father had a near-death experience. And when he had his near-death experience, everything changed. And from the moment that happened, we had a real connection and a real understanding of each other. And he no longer was like all church. He was more all love. And that was an absolutely beautiful thing with my dad and I. It was really difficult. The extended family, I'd hardly ever talk to them after that. My brother left the church before I did, and my mom is still she's 93, but she is still very Mormon and really believes the Mormon church.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your family has continued to attend?
Yeah.
And
A lot of my
do
great...
they view you kind of as a black sheep?
Probably. Like my uncle has passed. My great aunts and uncles all died. They all became Mormons. My father, their people are dying off, right? So
Right.
that's part of it. But some of them are still very active, and I probably am the sort of black sheep of the family, but in that area. But
Do they still invite you to like church events, baptisms, things like that?
nobody. So I have some that live here in Utah, and I don't get invited to those things. It's not. I mean, I don't even feel like they're like non-inviting me. They just know I'm not interested. I think that's more than. I don't feel ostracized.
Okay.
But I also don't have much in common with them. You know, once you leave the church, and then you hang out with people who are in the church, and they're mainly talking about their church callings and their, all that stuff. Is just like, oh, okay, but can we talk about the climate? Can we talk about something? So I don't feel hurt by that at all, by my family doing their thing. That they went that direction, and I'm this direction, and
But they still love you, and you still love them.
Yeah, I don't feel unloved at all. I felt a little disappointed by my parents not having my back. That was hard.
Yeah, I'm sure that was.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the evolution of Sunstone over? I guess it's been 30 years.
Over 30 years, yeah.
I mean, I guess you haven't really. Checked
I don't
in
know.
A lot,
I go when they bring us out and say, here, it's been 10 years. Now it's been 30 years. So I don't know if we'll ever do it again because we're getting old. But so I just went to that one session, and it was lovely. I was surprised that there were so many people there, actually. That people even remembered was quite surprising to me, that the September 6th happened.
And the people are still interested in talking to you on podcast.
I know, right? It was just really surprising to me. But yeah, I can't really speak to the evolution since Albert left.
Because you've just left it behind, basically.
I mean, I really have I have this really amazingly wonderful, fun life, and that's kind of where my focus is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk, since you were the first to get disciplined, can you talk about the dominoes that fell after you and your reaction?
We went to, everybody went to all the courts. It was like, so mine comes, this was great. I called Levina, I got this letter. She's like, this was at night, on a Sunday night. She's like, I'll be over tomorrow. She comes over the next day. She's got homemade bread and jam, calls every newspaper and every news thing. I mean, she called everybody.
Oh, wow.
So that's how the alert went out, right? And so, but at that point, it was only me. But soon after, I think even before my court, I can't remember, I think it was September 14th or something. I think she might have gotten, people were beginning to get letters. So that's why it was like and Levina liked the sound of the September 6th better than the September 5, so she included Avraham in that.
Oh.
She thought it sounded better.
Well, it should have been, I mean, because I think it was in your session, there was another author that said it really should be the September 8th because we should include Janice and
But that
Margaret.
didn't happen for another couple of years.
Right.
So, well, Janice a year later, and that's the other thing. I wrote a letter. Let me tell you about Janice. The Janice getting excommunicated was so strange to me.
Oh.
Because she was a believing Mormon. She has 9 kids. Like, the thing is that Janice writes papers that are so intellectual that most people can't even understand them, And I wrote a letter to the editor about her, which was it was so much fun to write because I wrote about how, she, who she was. She's this believing Mormon. She's got all these kids. And, I said that, and I basically said at the end, I said, maybe the general authorities need to stop pretending that there was a Victorian era where women stayed home and were happy and men went to work, but embraced their true brothers of the Middle Ages who went on a witch hunt, throwing women into pools of water to see if they were a witch. In fact, from now on, when women come to the waters of baptism, add 1 step, see if they float. It'll save us all a lot of time and heartache. No. And that went all over the Wasatch Front. Like, it got picked up all over. So that's probably part of why they don't want me back too. But when Janice got, that was really shocking to me because I went to both of her courts or something.
Okay.
And
she had 2.
She had 2, and it was just like, what are you? It was like a purge. This is Janice.
Yeah.
What are you doing? So,
well, I wonder if that's the difference. Janice was still going to church, whereas you just.
I had barely stopped.
Okay.
I had just not. So in May I stopped going.
Okay.
And because I was just like, this isn't.
So because you basically stepped away from the church and quit going, that made you not a target, but because Janice was still going?
Well, it made me I was still a target. I mean, I was targeted. What do you mean?
No, well, it's funny to me that Janice got put on probation, which she says was the same as disfellowshipment. And then a year later,
oh, right. Then they excommunicated. They didn't do anything.
They've never done that with you.
I don't know why. Honestly, I don't know why. Because in the handbook it says, if someone's disfellowshipped, you need to do something within like a year or two, or something like that. And It's been 30 years. I don't hear a word from anybody, which is fine. I mean, and I haven't taken my name off the records, partly because I keep forgetting. And I might sometime. I don't know, but. Yeah, I don't know. Isn't that weird, right?
And even Margaret, because she didn't get excommunicated until 2000.
Yeah, so that's why the September 8 makes sense, except for this was years later.
Yeah, well, I mean, both Janice and Margaret were in trouble, and I think Margaret said, Paul waved the red flag in front of the bull.
Yeah, well, it's Paul.
And they went after Paul.
It is Paul.
Instead of Margaret.
Yeah, instead of Margaret. But, Margaret is the same thing. She is so lovely and so wonderful. And the fact that they would, it just is like, it's just small-minded and mean. It's what Paul says, that Margaret's court was like being raped by the Care Bears.
Yeah. He said that. Yeah.
Because it was, painful. Because these are believing Mormons. And to go after them because of who knows why. Yeah. Petty.
And I think Margaret was still speaking in public, and you've just kind of like disappeared off the radar, and Mormonism's in your past, and you don't care about it anymore, and so there's no reason to go after you.
Maybe. I mean, I just went, like I said, when they asked me to do something else, go find something else to do, I did. So, and it's been really good. So yeah.
And so what do you think of these anniversaries that we keep having? Oh, it's been 30 years. There's a new book coming. Actually, I think it just came out this month.
Oh, did it? I should read it. First of all, it was a really interesting experience for me to come and like write a paper to give at Sunstone, because it brought up all kinds of stuff that I hadn't thought about for 30 years. Being there with people that I hadn't seen for a long time, it was really kind of lovely, actually. I loved what it took to write it again, because it was something I needed to do. It kind of let me know where I was, in a way that was really good.
Got those intellectual juices going.
Yeah, well, I didn't write a very intellectual. I wrote a really feeling paper, because the question was, where are you spiritually after 30 years? So I actually talked about where I was spiritually after 30 years. And so it was great, but it's every once in a while there's an article in the paper that they never tell me, it just shows up, and I'll get people saying, "Hey, you were in the paper again." It's like, it just kind of amusing in a way, like, really, because it was a long time ago.
Because for you, it's just totally in the rear view, and so probably these anniversaries, you're like, "Oh, what?" Yeah,
it was just kind of, we're aware, and plus, what I have loved about this time is, it reconnected me with Margaret and Paul in particular, because we have been, Margaret's been busy, I've been busy, and I'm seeing them more often, which makes me so happy. And I love seeing Janice, who I adore. I mean, it's just, those things have been really worth let's have this 30-year reunion, and I don't want to lose touch with them again, because they're fantastic human beings, so yeah.
Well, Margaret and Paul have both of them been on twice, and they're fun people.
They're great. They're really great. And Mike and Lavina. Lavina came. She came with warm bread and jam to my house,
Right.
And so anyway, so it was good. It was good doing that after 30 years. Yeah, but I don't think you're going to do it in another 30 years. So
you won't be here.
I don't think I'll be here in 30 years.
I don't know. Your mother's still here.
My mom is still here. She's 93. So we'll see. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, I'm trying to think. Is there anything else we need to cover?
I don't. Do you have any questions?
I think that's it then. So, Lynne Whitesides, I really appreciate you for being here on Gospel Tangents, and thanks for being on the show.
No, thank you. It's been really fun. It's really fun.
Mm-hmm. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Lynne Whitesides. Lynne, thank you so much for sitting down with me. It was awesome to talk to you and learn more about your story. If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, subscribe on either Patreon or at gospeltangents.com. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire audio uninterrupted. On our $10 tier, if you would like to see the whole video, you can see that either on youtube.com/gospeltangents, or I've got a special Facebook group devoted for full videos. So subscribe at gospeltangents.com and sign up for just $10 a month. For $20 a month, if you'd like to get some bonus content, maybe some of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor, you can sign up for that. And then if you'd like to talk to me for $100 a month, we'll do a monthly phone call on something like Zoom, and you can ask me anything you want. So thanks again. Also, don't forget about the merch, mugs, t-shirts, hats, things like that. I'm trying to get the ties up there. Hopefully I can get up there. And thanks again for watching Gospel Tangents, and click here for some more videos.